Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit record, and then I will start the slideshow. Okay, so security risks. So it's talking about, there are tons of them. Right here, we're talking about hackers. Originally, it meant someone who mastered the inner workings of computer hardware and software in an effort to better understand them. Today, hacker is used to describe an individual who gains unauthorized access to systems, and they can be just about any type of system. Hackers are categorized according to their intent and the prior approval of the organization whose networks they're hacking. White hat hackers, which is what you're training to be, is an IT security expert hired by organizations to identify security vulnerabilities. They are sometimes called ethical hackers. Black hat hackers, those are groups or individuals that cause damage, steal data, or compromise privacy. And then there are gray hat hackers. Those abide by a code of ethics, but it's their own code of ethics. They might engage in illegal activity, but their intent is to educate and assist. So they're not looking to damage, steal, or compromise privacy like the black hat hackers are, but they don't exactly have all of the permissions like the white hat hackers do. So vulnerability, what they're talking there is weakness of the system, process, or architecture. Exploit, the act of taking advantage of a vulnerability. A zero-day exploit or zero-day attack. This one takes advantage of a software vulnerability before it's been patched or before it's even known about. Keep in mind, malicious and determined intruders may use one technique, which allows them to use a second technique. So basically, a lot of the times people will use one technique to get in and then pivot and use multiple techniques to get further access. People risks. So this is something that I frequently focus on because you can always make better hardware, you can make better software. People are usually the weakest link in the chain of hardware, software people. More than half of all security breaches are caused by human errors, ignorance, and omission. Social engineering is a strategy to gain users' passwords or any other sorts of information. Some common types are phishing, baiting, quid pro quo, tailgating, piggybacking, and shoulder surfing. Are you guys familiar with those at all? I can quickly go over those. Yeah, okay. I'll just do a quick, so phishing, I think pretty much all of us know, it's just the email, click on this, and it's not legitimate. Baiting is when they do a more sophisticated phishing attack. It's usually aimed at a specific person. Quid pro quo is really similar to, if you guys have ever taken sexual harassment training, quid pro quo literally means this for that. So they act like they're doing something for you and they want something for it. Tailgating, this one is actually more of a problem now because we have, especially with school shootings and things like that, they have those areas where you have to badge in to get into. And tailgating is when you badge in and someone tries to walk right in behind you without badging in. Piggybacking is when they just add something on to whatever is there already. And shoulder surfing is literally someone just looking over your shoulder to get information. The most important defense against social engineering is employee training, and a lot of them just plain don't have employee training still. Insider threat is the most difficult thing to train for because you never know really what you're looking for. It can be someone that is perfectly fine one day and then just decides, nope, I'm done the next. So insider threats are one of the most difficult to prevent. They're one of the most difficult to find, but they are one of the ones that people are trained, especially the higher up, to try and have some behavioral signs and things so that people realize, oh, hey, maybe this is where this is going. Some reductions that you can do for threats, for insider threats, or background checks for new hires. Enforce your principle of least privilege. I cannot stress that enough. Employees given minimal access to do their jobs. Do not give people more rights than they need. We're naturally curious. If you give people more rights than they need, they're going to go, oh, what does this do? I've seen people get in a lot of trouble, not on purpose, just curious and want to see where it goes. So if you're in charge of that, don't give them any more access than they need. They can just get themselves in trouble. Design checks and balances on employee behavior. When you can deploy a DLP or data loss prevention solution that identifies sensitive data and prevents it from being copied or transmitted off the network. Now, these are actually really cool. You didn't see much of this before about 5 years ago, and you see these tacked on to email and anything that's going to be moving data out in and out of the network. And it has these filters that you can put on there that look for things like social security numbers and all sorts of PII, the personally identifiable information. Or you can even do like, say you have some sort of special sensitive data that you want to write a, hey, this is what this looks like. You basically write a little snippet and say, and it recognizes it and goes, hey, this looks like it might be a problem. Do you really want this transmitted off the network? And what it does, at least on the email side that I've seen this done, it puts it in it flags it, tells the administrator, hey, this might be a problem. And then your administrator goes and looks at it and says, oh, okay, no, this is fine. Or, they go and have a chat with the person about sending stuff incorrectly. Technology risks. Okay, I know that everybody has heard of a DOS. That's the denial of service attack, because they are talked about the most on the news. Then there's the DDoS, which is just the bigger version of it. So denial of service attacks, that's when an intruder issues a flood of broadcast ping messages, preventing legitimate users from accessing normal network resources. There's a whole bunch of different types. So DDoS, this one's an orchestrated attack through several resources. A lot of times, the biggest one that I was the most impressed with was they took unpatched Internet of Things devices and used them as zombies, created a large bot network, and then were basically using it as DDoS for hire. It was impressive, the amount of work that went into it. There were millions of devices that were on this thing. And then, so they had all these unpatched devices, and you would think, oh, a little, router or a network thermometer doesn't mean anything. Well, when you have millions of them, and they're bouncing back things and being used for attacks, it's impressively bad. Oh, those can be quite damaging depending on how many resources they have on their botnet. Then there's the DRDoS, which is distributed reflection DOS attack. It's a DDoS that's bounced off uninfected computers, which are called reflectors, before directed to the target. There's an amplified version of that, which is conducted using small, simple requests that trigger very large responses from the target. There's the permanent DOS attack, which damages a device's firmware beyond repair. Luckily, I have not run into that one. And then there's friendly DOS attack, which is an unintentional DOS attack, which has no malicious intent. Usually those are, oops, I configured something wrong and it ate your network resources, which, is a bad oops, but you can accidentally do all sorts of things like that. So that's what a friendly DOS is. So a DOS attack using a SYN flood, this is what the most generic one is you see, and it's just basically flooding with the, instead of doing the SYN act, the three-way handshake, it just dumps SYN instead of doing the whole rest of the SYN act, the three-way handshake. So it's just like, I don't know what to do. This is what the attack with the zombies look like. So you have your attacker, that's your command. Then you have your zombies, and then they have all the sin ones that go out and dump and attack whatever resource it is they're attacking. Other technology risks related to weaknesses of wireless transmission, authentication vulnerabilities, lack of encryption, or flaws in software designs. So that's why Patch Tuesday's out there for Microsoft, and why they frequently make sure if you've got a patch solution that automates patching, it's a much better use of money than it is to manually do it, because sometimes people forget. And patching security holes and making sure that those weaknesses are not there, those known weaknesses are not there, is a good spending, good use of money. And you just have to word it right, because sometimes administrators don't understand the point of patching. So you just have to, go all the way down to the, okay, it doesn't seem that bad, but this is what could happen if it doesn't get done correctly. So other types of attack on vulnerabilities include on-path attacks. Those rely on intercepted transmissions and can take several forms. This one's also referred to as a man-in-the-middle attack. Basically, they called it a man-in-the-middle because you're intercepting transmissions between 2 points. But now, because you don't need 2 points, they started calling it on-path. There's a deauth attack or a deauthentication attack. The attacker sends fake deauthentication frames to the AP client or both, triggering the deauthentication process, and it knocks one or more clients off, and then they have to re-authenticate. The point of that one is you fake the deauth frames, and then it goes, oh, okay, well, here's all the stuff, and then you capture the packets for the authentication, and then hopefully you're able to get all of the frames that you need. And then if your equipment is good enough and you're able to capture everything, then and if the person's security is weak enough, then you'll be able to decrypt whatever password and authentication processes they have in there. So that's the point of a deauthentication attack. Insecure protocols and services. So you remember how we were talking about always make sure that certain ports and protocols and things are shut down. That's why certain TCP/IP protocols are inherently insecure. DNS poisoning and spoofing. This is altering your DNS records on a DNS server. An attacker can redirect internet traffic from a legit website to a phishing website. And then backdoors, which is a security flaw that allows unauthorized users to gain access to the system. Now, there's an excellent example that was part technology, part social engineering that I like to use in explanation of how the hacking the people and hacking the equipment works really well together. So it was a combination of DNS poisoning and combination of social engineering. So it took place in Washington. It was well known that one, I think it was a legal office, but I'm not 100% sure, that they ate at a specific restaurant pretty much every week, several times a day, and they ordered online. So they already knew that this office went online, that they had this specific website that they went to, that it was an online ordering system. They knew it was a law office. There's a lot that they already knew there. So what they did was they spoofed, poisoned that website menu offering, and then they also put out some things. I think they put out flyers, if I remember correctly, saying that, hey, go look at our new menu items, basically to get more people to hit that website, and then infected people that hit the poisoned faked website as well. So, don't be surprised if you see a lot of these in conjunction with each other, because if you have one attack, sometimes there's another one that's just waiting to hit you, or you have multiple attacks that are rolled into one. And did I see a question pop up there? No, okay. Okay, malware risks. So malicious software, and there's a whole bunch of different versions we'll talk about here. This refers to any program designed to intrude upon or harm a system or resources. So viruses, Trojan horses, worms, bots, and ransomware. It's a generalized terms, and it refers to all this different type of stuff. So when people talk about malware, try to make them be specific if you need more information. So a virus, and be specific, because there are several tests and certification exams where they say, what is a virus? And they want you to like list out. And I've seen, when I did my CEH, it was basically a mix and match terminology type thing. I don't think they still do that, but you know, this particular question is something you'll run into multiple times. So a virus is a program that replicates itself with the intent to infect more computers. Trojan horse is a program that disguises itself as something useful, but actually harms your system. A worm is a program that runs independently. There's your key right there, runs independently and travels between computers and across networks. A bot is a program that runs automatically without requiring a person to start or stop it. Ransomware is a program that locks a user's data or computer system until a ransom is paid, or if you had a backup until you wipe everything and redo that. So this is a version of example of the Jigsaw ransomware, and usually they're Bitcoin of some sort that they want you to use. Some malware characteristics: encryption. Some malware is encrypted, like the ransomware, to prevent detection. Stealth. Some malware disguises itself as legitimate programs. A lot of them do that now because a lot of antivirus programs have some form of signature recognition or even AI, so they have to hide a little bit in order to get onto your system. You know, I'm not sure if crypto mining would technically be called a bot because you have to set it up first. It depends on how you're setting it up, I think, for crypto mining. Sorry. Let me go back here because it likes to do that. There we go. For some reason, it won't let me use the scroll thing on the web version. Polymorphism. This one I've seen asked on multiple certification exams. So polymorphism is the ability to change its characteristics every time it's transferred to a new system, which means it's very difficult to find. So it moves to a new system and some characteristic changes. Time dependence. This is malware that's programmed to activate on a particular date. And logic bombs are programs designed to start when certain conditions are met. So logic bombs are like, if such and such program opens, then it's kind of an if then, and I know if then is, but it's basically the if this condition is met, then launch the logic bomb. So that's what a logic bomb is. And a lot of times, especially now that they have like a lot of the script kiddie type packages that you can use, you can basically just like point and click and be like, I want to do this, this, and this. And you can dump all of that in there without really knowing how much you have. Okay, which of the following social engineering attack types is most likely to require that the attacker have existing knowledge about the victim? Tailgating, shoulder surfing, piggybacking, or phishing? A, B, C, or D? Looks like all the people are going with the D. Yep. There we go. Okay, risk assessment and management. So risk assessment and management is its own beast within security. In fact, you can specialize just in this within security. So if this is something you're interested in, there's a whole mess just specifically about this, and it's very fascinating. So effective risk management happens as two layers. You have a security risk assessment, which evaluates threats to and vulnerabilities of the network. And then you have business risk assessment, and that evaluates the impact of potential threats on business processes. And those work together, and you really need to do business risk and security risk assessment. The biggest thing that you need to know about risk assessment is when someone says, I want to be 100% risk-free, it is not possible. There is a certain amount of risk that someone has to be able to accept, depending upon their security balance. You know, they might want to be able to spend more money for backing up their servers versus having to pay out for ransomware, you know, things like that. But every employer has a slightly different risk level that they are willing to accept. So that's why you need the business risk and the security risk on there. So a business process, what they're talking there is a series of steps that accomplishes a defined goal. Vendor risk assessment, this is a third-party risk assessment that evaluates security and compliance risks related to suppliers and vendors a company does business with. This has gotten particularly important with the supply chain issues that we've seen since COVID. And also there have been in the last, I think it's more than 5 years, there have been a couple of really big oopses in the government where they've bought some, they didn't do their due diligence and they bought some stuff that they should not have bought. Like, for example, they bought some technology, like I think the biggest ones were security cameras that were made by China that had backdoors on them, some security software that was made in Russia, and all of the servers came off of Russia and they were using them on NSA contractor computers, things like that. Oh, vendor risk assessment and supply chain risk assessments have become a lot more important. Posture assessment is a thorough examination of each aspect of the network to determine how it might be compromised. And a security audit is an assessment performed by a company that's been accredited by an agency that sets network security standards. It's also a good idea to do an internal security audit, especially if you're taking over, just so that you can see how everything's run. Yeah, no network. Everything's air gapped. That's the nice term for, you know, you don't have any network connections. Okay, attack simulations. During a posture assessment, you might use some of the methods a hacker uses to identify cracks in security architecture. Sorry, I just had a... There are 3 types of attack simulations. Vulnerability assessments, that is used to identify vulnerabilities in a network. There's 2 types. There's authenticated and unauthenticated. Authenticated is when the attacker is given the same access as a trusted user would have. And then unauthenticated, the attacker begins on the perimeter of the network looking for vulnerabilities that do not require trusted user privileges. There are a bunch of different ways that you can call this. There's like a black box is basically also an unauthenticated. That means you basically have no access and they want you to go ahead and try to hit it like you would if you were an outside attacker. Penetration testing or pen testing uses variable tools to find network vulnerabilities and attempts to exploit them. There's red team, blue team, and there's even purple team now, which combines both of those. but during red team, blue team exercises, the red team conducts the attack and the blue team attempts to defend the network. They do those yearly, I think Homeland Security does those, and you can get on red team, blue team exercises for different agencies, and they're really good for your resume if you happen to get a chance to get on one of those. So here's an example of red team, blue team, purple team. So red team, offensive security, vulnerability assessment, social engineering, and penetration testing. Blue team, defensive security, implement controls, security monitoring, and incident response. Purple team, that they work on improving overall security posture and collaborative security. Okay, scanning tools. There are a ton of scanning tools. So you can use those to find crucial information like what hosts are on the network, what services, including applications and versions running on every host, software configurations, open, closed, and filtered ports on every host, existence, type, placement, and configuration of firewalls, software configurations, unencrypted or poorly encrypted sensitive data. So Nmap, Nessus, and Metasploit, all three of which I know you want, we'll be using Nmap and ZenMap. ZenMap is just a GUI version of Nmap. Nessus is a company-owned. It's a lot of fun, but it's kind of expensive now. So Nmap is designed to scan large networks quickly and provide information about the network and its hosts. Nessus performs a more sophisticated scan, and Metasploit combines known scanning and exploit techniques to explore potentially new attack routes. So if you use Nmap and Metasploit, you can look at your network and go, okay, now these are the holes, now how do I attack them? And that's what we do. And then we go, okay, now that we do that, how do we plug those things that we attack? So this is what it looks like. This is Metasploit. Metasploit doesn't look particularly pretty. It's just a command line console tool. And this is an example of what the different probes look like. And as you can see, this one, they managed to hit something and that's circled in the red that has a default admin password sitting somewhere out there, which is very, very bad. Honeypots and honeynets. These are a lot of fun to set up too. A honeypot is a decoy system that's purposely vulnerable. It is designed to fool hackers and gain information about their behavior. A honeypot might be given an enticing name, such as one that indicates a name server or a storage location for confidential data. A honeynet is a network of honeypots. So you try to make it look as enticing as possible. You don't want to make it look too good. You want to make it look like it's part of a production environment, which is why they went from just a honeypot to a honeynet, because it's basically it's meant to look like your network, and then basically let the person run through so you can watch the attacker and see, okay, so this is what they're going to do if they get in. And it's really fascinating because it's given white hat hackers a ton of information on how to go back and fix holes, and then watch the actual behavior of the person once they get inside of the network. Yeah, I know. Every time I see that, I think of Huber and Eeyore, and yeah. Physical security. This is something that's often overlooked, but physical security is part of our purview. Physical access to critical components must be restricted and controlled. Only trusted networking staff should have access to secure computer/data rooms. Preventative measures such as locked doors can make it more difficult for unauthorized people to get into these areas. I have seen a bunch of places where, in order to save money, they shortcut it, and they're like, yeah, this is the server room with one key that everyone has, and what's the point after that? And it's important to have good detection measures in place for those items when someone is able to breach a secured perimeter. So it's important to not just have the computer side, but to physically stop someone from being able to just plug straight into things is also important. Okay, prevention methods. So access control technologies include the following. There's a keypad or cipher lock. Cipher locks are physical or electronic locks requiring a code to open the door. Access badges, a lot of us have dealt with those. They're just those little badges or smart cards. Biometrics, a device scans individuals' unique physical characteristics, usually fingerprints, because they're the cheapest. Access control vestibule creates a confined space between two locked doors. Locking rack and locking cabinet restrict physical access to servers, routers, switches, and firewalls installed on the rack to prevent an intruder from making configuration changes to these devices. And a smart locker allows controlled access to equipment, computers, packages, hardware in need of repair or written account credentials stored for emergency access. So locking racks and cabinets, if you do not have the ability to physically, because there are some places where it's like, this is the room that we use for 5 million different things. Well, that's great. Then you need a locking rack and cabinet to stop people from being able to get into that. So there are all sorts of other things too. So here's just an example of this one's using an electronic badge to get back. Here's your data room. And one thing to remember is just because everybody is an IT person doesn't mean that all of the IT people need access to all of the same resources. So not everyone that works for that department may necessarily need access to that. So it's that privilege escalation. Make sure that you don't give physical access to people that don't need to be in those areas. Detection methods. So methods of detecting physical intrusion: motion detection, cameras, tamper detection. These are sensors that detect physical penetration, temperature extremes, input variable voltage variations, input frequency variations, or certain kinds of radiation. Asset tags, these monitor the movement and conditions of equipment, inventory, and people. Usually asset tags are there to find stuff when it gets lost, but it has become a lot more important now to tag and monitor equipment movement because equipment has gotten so much smaller and more expensive. So you can have devices that can fit in the palm of your hand that are extremely expensive. So it's important to be able to track where those devices go a lot. Yeah. Laptops, things like that. RFID labels. They're a very, very simple way to do that. Device hardening. This includes steps to secure a device from network or software supported attacks. There are many layers of defense you can implement. So device hardening can be just about anything as long as you are cutting off, basically you're cutting off avenues of attack. And depending on which industry you're in, devices can be moderate to extremely hardened depending on what you're using them for. Yeah. No, I wouldn't suggest wrapping them in tinfoil, but still. Updates to applications, OSs, device firmware for bug fixes, add new features, and close security gaps. Just make sure that you update everything and often, especially the more secure an item is, the more updates, the more frequently you need to check. Process of properly managing and applying security patches. You need to have discovery, standardization, defense in depth, vulnerability reporting, implementation, assessment, and risk mitigation. So basically you need to have a way to discover what devices you have out there, and whether or not what their patch levels are. You need to have a standardized method for applying and managing your patches. Defense in depth is basically concentric rings of okay, think of it as fences. This one's it gets more difficult the further in you go. Vulnerability reporting, that tells you, hey, you've got something out here with either a patch that needs to be applied or an old piece of software. Depending on the vulnerability scanners, it can tell you all sorts of things. The implementation is just, that works with your standardization. You need to have a standardized type of implementation. Then you need to go back and assess it and make sure, okay, this is actually functioning, and then look at how much of your risk it has actually mitigated. Administrative credentials. Many devices are managed through remote access connections. Using SSH keys is more secure than using a password. A securely encrypted key is more difficult to crack. So being more secure in remote access is something people have had to learn. A lot of people now use VPNs for work connections, and then they use SSH keys and multiple types of authentication. So if you are using short passwords for remote access connections, that is definitely bad, and you need to look at your security stats at your organization. Many devices offer the option to configure several administrative accounts with varying levels of access. Some user accounts are given privileged access. Security precautions that might be taken for these accounts include the following: limited use, limited location, limited duration, limited access, and limited privacy. Insecure services and protocols should be disabled in a system whenever possible. To protect devices, follow these guidelines: reduce access paths, choose secure protocols, reduce startup processes, disable unneeded services, declutter software, streamline the network, close unused ports. Basically, you want to reduce your attack surface, and that just means chopping off avenues that they can attack you from. So
it's like any,
go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, it's like any defense. You reduce the areas of attack so that way you can defend the area, or you reduce the vectors of attack so that you can defend the remainder better.
Yep, exactly. All right, and looks like we are on to passwords. Hashing. This means the transformation of data through an algorithm that reduces the amount of space needed for the data. SHA, which is secure hash algorithm, is the most commonly used hashing algorithm. Its primary advantage is its resistance to collisions. Do you guys know what they're talking about when they're talking about collisions? Okay, so when it's talking about collisions is when you make a secure algorithm, you have to be able to hash the data, and basically that just means you use an algorithm to translate it into unrecognizable information. And a collision is when you have two different values that actually come out to the same thing. So, which can happen in a badly done hashing algorithm. So SHA is resistant to collisions, which means you're less likely to punch in the same information and have, or different information and have them collide, thinking it's the same thing when it's not. So there are different versions of SHA. There's 0, 1, 2, and 3. SHA-2 and 3 are often implemented together for increased security. This is just a nice explanation of plain text, ciphertext, encryption, decryption. And I would suggest that you start to get familiar with this as you go on. You're going to need to know more about this. Anti-malware software. Malware generally leaves evidence of itself. Some malware can be detected only via anti-malware software. Some symptoms of malware: an unexplained increase in file sizes, significant unexplained system performance decline, unusual error messages, significant unexpected system memory loss, periodic unexpected rebooting, and fluctuations in display quality. Usually, whatever I tell someone is if your computer suddenly starts acting in ways you haven't seen before, like write down those symptoms, and then you can usually track backwards and find out what type of malware it is. When implementing anti-malware software, one of your most important decisions is where to install the software. Some scenarios are host-based, server-based, network-based, or cloud-based. And you have to balance your protection with the performance impact. So it depends on where you want to scan from and how much your company is willing to pay. Server-based is usually for an on-prem services. Host-based, a lot of them now have a server-based, and then they have a user-based program that they talk to. Network-based, they're more expensive. And then cloud-based, you're seeing more of a shift there because it's easier to manage. It's a little more expensive, but it's easier to manage, and you get some features that you don't normally see when you have physically on the same server network as the other stuff. Any questions about that before I get into asset disposal? Okay, asset disposal. So mining data from discarded devices can yield significant insights into a company's operations, proprietary systems, and sensitive data. Your company is legally responsible for the data contained on devices even after you stop using them. In many cases, companies will hire professional disposal services that adequately sanitize or destroy devices so no data can be recovered. These services often provide a CED, or Certificate of Electronic Equipment Destruction, which serves as a legal protection should data later be recovered from your device. So the reason that you want that, yeah, and they actually have, because it used to be you could just use a magnetic thing and trash it, but now with solid state hard drives, they basically have these, they look almost kind of like a massive hole punch. And they have these tines that are designed depending on the model, and you just crunch the whole thing down and it just chunks straight into the SSD and trashes it, because there isn't any other way to completely securely destroy other than physically destroying the device. A security policy for network users identifies security goals, risks, authority levels, designated security coordinator, and team members, responsibilities of each team member and employee. A user security policy should not state which hardware, software, architecture, and protocols will be used to ensure security. You want to give an overarching so that anytime you change hardware or software or anything like that, you don't have to update all of your policies. An example would be setting a network-wide security policy that prompts users to change their passwords every 3 months. Security policy goals. So typical goals for security policies include the following: ensure authorized users have appropriate resource access, prevent unauthorized user access, protect sensitive data from unauthorized access, prevent accidental hardware and software damage, prevent intentional hardware or software damage, create a secure environment in which the network and systems can withstand, respond to, and recover from threats, communicate each employee's responsibilities, and have employees sign a consent to monitoring form. Technically, you don't need that consent to monitor form, but it's kind of a CYA thing, because that way, if you have an issue, then you can say, well, you consented. So it's generally better to do that. I do not like bring your own device programs, depending on their application, I should say. For staff, it was great, but when they had bring your own device ones for teenagers, it was a nightmare. So bring your own device refers to the practice of allowing people to bring their smartphones, laptops, or other technology into the facility for performance of work or school responsibilities. There's bring your own application, bring your own cloud, bring your own other technology, or choose your own device. Part of a BYOD policy might include onboarding and offboarding procedures. These configurations can be handled automatically by MDM or mobile device management software. But the problem is there's such an array when you're doing these, and so many people don't want you messing up their devices that it can be difficult to manage. Acceptable use policies. An AUP explains to users what they can and cannot do while accessing a network's resources. It also explains the penalty for violations. Some restrictions might include the following: using company resources to fulfill job obligations and not for personal tasks. Be aware that activities on the network can be and are monitored. Immediately report any suspected compromise of confidential data. Always sign off or lock a device. Do anything illegal using company devices. You would think that that would be obvious, but there are so many people that have been nailed by that one. Don't try to circumvent network security restrictions. Also another one you would think would be obvious. Again. NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, they come in all different varieties. This is a document that defines what confidential and private means to the organization. If you work in an environment like a hospital, a security policy should classify information in degrees of sensitivity that correspond to how strictly its access is regulated. I had to sign massive NDAs when I worked for the State Police Forensic Lab, and I still can't talk about any of that information because of them, which makes sense because it has Fourth and Fifth Amendment right violations and things like that, depending on the person that it could have affected. Password policies. Let's see how bad these are. Tips for making and keeping passwords secure. Change default passwords. Always change default passwords. Do not put personal information in there. Do not use your birth date. Don't use your name. Don't use your nickname. If there's things that you are known for and have used out on social media, don't use those in there. Avoid real words. That one, it depends on how you use them. Longer is stronger, that is true. The complexity, though, that one is not necessarily true. Don't use sticky notes. I don't know how many times I've seen this. So I would go in and work on the computer, and then I would lift up their keyboard. You can't really see it because mine's tied down, so lift it up. You'd lift up their keyboard, and on the underside of their keyboard was a sticky note with their password all the time. Don't reuse your passwords. Absolutely use a password manager. So let me explain complexity versus length. So for a long time, they thought that the more complex a password was, the more difficult it was for a computer to get through it. It's actually the length that makes it more difficult for the computer to get through. So complexity is a double-edged sword there, because people don't really remember super complex passwords. And if you don't remember the password, you have a tendency to go in and change it frequently, which makes it less secure. So remember that. Real words are fine depending on how you use them. Make a sentence, a really long one, or you can do the random words with like dashes or things like that, which some people use. And what I personally like to do is the password manager, where you remember your password manager and then you do the randomized gobbledygook from the password manager. That's the best way to do it, so that you have that versus, I know, because then you can have 70 character passwords and use your password manager versus having to remember all the other ones. Okay, so this is just an example of a password policy. And I know we've all seen this one. There was a really interesting study that was done by NIST that said that forcing them to constantly change their passwords every 90 days was actually detrimental, because that caused people to do things like creating those passwords where it's the same password and then like a couple of numbers on the end of them. And they found that if they just use a much longer password and didn't change it more than a year, for rolling password changes, then it was a lot more secure. It was a really interesting article, and it was more about, it wasn't so much about the physical or the network security. It was more about the human psyche and how we have a tendency to hamster circuit the rules to make it easier for us. So people will do, yeah, exactly. And then we'll add a 1 on their password with a 1. Next one, password 2, so you have a tendency to do things that are easy for you, not necessarily best for security. Privileged user agreements. This addresses specific concerns related to privileged access given to administrators and certain support staff. Outlines guidelines, rules, restrictions, and consequences of violations. When accessing a privileged account, the user should only stay signed into the account as long as it's necessary to perform tasks and then sign off. Privileged users need more frequent training and reminders to avoid falling for social engineering attacks of various types. Privileged accounts may be monitored through PAM or privileged account management tools. So this is, a lot of the times they'll do this, and then, so you have your regular account and then you'll have a privileged account, and you'll use, it's kind of like privileged escalation in order to do the higher on the food chain stuff, so that you're not constantly logged in and vulnerable when you're doing those. Anti-malware policies. So an anti-malware policy provides rules for using anti-malware software and policies for installing programs, sharing files, using external storage. Suggestions for anti-malware policy guidelines. Every computer should be equipped with malware detection and cleaning software. Users should not be allowed to alter or disable the anti-malware software. Users should know what to do in case their anti-malware program detects malware. Anti-malware teams should focus on maintaining the anti-malware measures. Users should be prohibited from installing any unauthorized software on their systems, and system-wide alerts should be issued to network users, notifying them of serious malware threats and advising them how to prevent infections. Now, the problem with security is the higher the security, the lower the usability. So depending on what type of environment that you're in, if you're in an environment where they want a higher usability, you'll see some of the security drop. Just be aware that that's what happens. Okay, what kind of software can be used to secure employee-owned devices? PUA, NDA, MDM, BYOD. We got one answer. Anybody else? There we go. Good job. So this is just basically mobile device management. Okay. So that is it for that one. And I know there was a lot of, we kind of coasted over a lot of high level concepts there. So if you have any questions, just let me know. But that is it for tonight's lecture. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay. If not, then I'll see you guys. Go hit the books and let me know if you have any questions. Get with your groups. Remember that next week is when your project is due. So have questions and stuff like that to me or Zach. If you have any questions going on, remember we have a visitor in Discord. So be polite. And, you know, please go visit Discord because we want them to know that we're, yes, we are using Discord and things like that. So we don't want them to, you know, shut that off, obviously. But please be polite. And if you need any help, stick around. Otherwise, have a good night, guys.